on clinical supervision, especially as a contractor, maybe in your own private practice, and people doing the bare minimum in our field, especially as it relates to paying it forward to future licensed providers and honestly protecting our field. And so I've been pretty much playing around with this topic for the last 9 months as it relates to creating specific content around, do you have what it takes to be a clinical supervisor so that you can actually help future clinicians go into the field and be fully prepared? And every time I post it or send out an email newsletter, I receive a lot of questions, comments, concerns for our future generation of mental health providers. So I thought that because this is wrapping up a beautiful year, that we would make this a series. And what I'm going to do is be breaking down in a multi-part series. I'm not sure if it's going to be like a 2, 3, 4-parter, but it will all be delivered this month in December. And my goal is to take you behind the scenes of first look of what bare minimum supervision looks like and like what not to do. Okay. And then I'm also going to be sharing with you how students will respond to you when you may do something that is in the best interest of them for their future, but they may not be used to the change. Okay. So let's go ahead and hop into it. And so, by the way, I do have a resource guide for supervision, and if you're a group practice owner providing supervision and that thin line as well. I have a guide in the description box, also the link at the top of my page on YouTube and or on social media like on Instagram and TikTok. So if you want to really dive deep into clinical supervision as a starter kit, and or to make sure that what you are doing is ethical and up to par with paying it forward, then make sure you check that out. All right, so let's go ahead and get into it. So in this part 1, I am going to be talking about what I learned working with, I'm going to focus on one specific agency and what I learned during that process of what is considered what I call the bare minimum of clinical supervision. So part 1 is walking you through being approached with an opportunity. And so I'm a licensed clinical psychologist. I'm located in Southern California, and I'm licensed through the Board of Psychology. So I don't really go on LinkedIn at all. Okay. The only time I really updated my profile is when I had first started my private practice, and I just didn't really know what opportunities were out there for us as entrepreneurs. And so something randomly nudged me to say, hey, go over and check your LinkedIn. And of course, on LinkedIn, you will get a lot of nudges related to opportunities. So just pay attention. So I was approached by an agency, I would say months before I had checked. And then they had asked me about my interest in a W-9 supervision position. And at the time, I had already left my county job. I was in my own solo private practice. I believe at that time I had already paused or stopped my group practice where I was supervising 8 clinicians at a time. And I had recently had my son. So yeah, my group practice was on pause. And one of the reasons why it attracted me for this opportunity is, if you're not familiar with me, I've been a college professor. I was a college professor for over 18 years. I really love to teach, and to me, that's part of clinical supervision. But I wanted it to go deeper than just supervision. I just don't want to sign someone's progress notes, okay? I wanted, and I always like for supervision to be very intentional. So I built a connection with the person who had outreached to me via DM or LinkedIn DM. And I emailed and said, is the opportunity still available? And they said, yes. Okay, fine. So this person, I really loved the research that I found about their agency online. So do research on whoever you are going into contract with. And when I had a conversation with them via email and also via phone to set up an interview, I really liked that they were an active member in the community. They were from the community in South Central Los Angeles. And they have built this community, a nonprofit, from scratch, from their heart, for their passion for decades. And I really love when somebody has a passion for the work to serve the people, because they're going to be around for a very long time. So their nonprofit over time, as I learned more about the agency, end up developing into a Medi-Cal approved like clinical program. Okay. So that's like the context. Now, part 2, I'm walking you through like how I was introduced to this, just so that if you are introduced to an opportunity like this, I'm going to be highlighting some red flags even that you want to take care of during an interview process if you go into someone else's agency. But also, I'm going to be highlighting some things with clinicians that you also want to pay close attention to. So let's talk about the interview and my initial impressions. Okay. So we set up the interview, and I don't know if she did this intentionally, or I think she did. She said, "Do you want to have your interview that cross references the same time that they do clinical supervision, so that when I walk in, I kind of have to bypass the clinicians to go in? I can say hello, etc. And then I can go in her office and have the interview, but I can get the context of like the setup." So I scheduled the interview, and some of the things that I noticed definitely rubbed me the wrong way. So the interview included supervising my role, supervising mixed level trainees and with their diverse backgrounds, plus their specialties, plus the type of clientels that they served. Now, the client population is very important when you are a clinical supervisor, because you have to be equipped to supervise someone else to serve those clients. So I just want to insert this. Supervision should not just be looked at as another stream of income. You actually have to have a heart like a teacher to be able to properly and ethically supervise, because they're going to be going through that clinical process of diagnoses and all those kind of things. So the client population was as follows: outpatient mental health, mostly Medi-Cal, really not a lot of cash pay, some court mandated clients and or families, and then they had a mixture of groups. I know that one that was ran all the time was anger management. So because I knew all of that and or I asked questions about it, I wanted to understand what were the clinical needs of the clients, so that I can make sure that I am prepared to supervise the clinicians over those presenting problems, if that makes sense. Okay. And what I was really doing is reverse engineering proper training that I would like to introduce to the clinicians if they have not had it yet. So that entails like me asking questions as well to the agency owner, and me being able to talk to the active clinical supervisor, which I was able to talk to, which I'm going to get into that in a moment, because I want to make sure that I am set up and I'm setting them up for success. And so when I came, I realized that, and I think she may have actually hit me up before I got there or maybe after, because she saw my name, but it was a person that they still had worked there at the time, but we had worked in a juvenile facility together. We didn't work very closely, but we were under the same main supervisor through correctional facilities. Okay. So when I ran into her, it was good blood, gave her a hug or whatever, and said, "Hey, I'll chat with you on the break," etc. And she said that pretty much she's been with the agency, I think, for 2 years. She loved the work, but she is at a point in her career where it's been pretty much her time. And I get that. Like sometimes you just age or mature out of a position. So I didn't, think nothing of it. It was whatever. So the interview went well, and I was offered the role immediately. That's not new to me. If I'm a good match and you think I'm a good match, by all means, offer me the position. And so I started to ask about the supervision structure, and the agency director told me logistics about my time. So every week, I would, let's just say, be able to claim through W-9 10 hours. Now, initially, I didn't think anything about the 10 hours. I was like, cool, this is conducive to the other work that I am doing. So it did not bother me, and it doesn't take up a lot of my time. However, I wanted to talk to the acting clinical supervisor, because I want to see what their structure is, so I can really get an understanding of how much time do you really need from me, right? Because the director may not understand the context of clinical supervision behind closed doors, because they're not a clinician, and that happens from time to time. So once I was able to, finish the interview, I made the assumption that based on what I knew, I would need to create some systems for the clinicians to learn proper diagnosis, treatment, and all those things, because I got a sense that that's not what they had. Okay. So now let's move into my first observation. And this was during the interview process after I told them I'm going to accept the position, but I still wanted to observe. So, first observation of supervision. Throughout the interview, I pretty much sat in for a few moments during the interview day. These are the things that were definitely red flags, but it didn't scare me away. It just meant that I would need more structure. So I immediately noticed that it felt unorganized, and a little chaotic. And those are my words. This is my personal opinion. This is my hot take. Okay. So the supervisor was reviewing and signing progress notes during the round robin clinician check in. Now, I don't think it takes a rocket scientist to know that I cannot, if I'm a supervisor, listen to what a clinician is saying about what they want to talk about in clinical supervision or what's happening with their clients. If I'm also ideally reading the progress notes, ideally giving feedback around the progress notes, and signing the progress notes, and or giving it back to the clinician with, notes. Okay. So I noticed that that was happening simultaneously. As they were talking about their cases, there was no question around how to conceptualize the case for diagnosis, treatment planning, etc. There was no client or no evidence of client formulation. Now, granted, I didn't stay that long, but this was the check in. And I think that the check in typically sets the tone for what's about to happen for the next hour or two in supervision, I thought. So there was no talks of client formulation. There was no talks around even a desire to understand the client's concerns or issues on a deeper level. It was just more about progress notes, court mandated documentation. It just felt more like a checklist. Okay. And I couldn't understand how any clinical supervisor could manage ethics and reading a dozen progress notes simultaneously. That's just my opinion. So these were all major red flags immediately. So I just continued to observe and try to understand the context. And then I talked to her later and she explained some things that I just will leave off camera. Okay. So then more of my mindset that I want to share with you. And I want to introduce to you like my first day on the job. So I got there a little early. I wanted to introduce myself and make sure that I was there when they were entering to the room. They knew that there was a depart of their previous supervisor. Because I was there during the break during my interview, they did go ahead and introduce me as the new clinical supervisor. The person gave me great accolades, which meant that they knew they were in good hands because the program that we were in, I was technically overseeing her, not through licensure level because she was licensed, that supervisor, but I was overseeing the quality assurance, which meant that technically I was reviewing all of her paperwork. So she knew that they needed structure. She knew that apparently I was exactly what they needed. So they knew that they were in good hands. Okay. So when I entered into the role with my typical quality assurance mindset, I knew that I wanted to bring clarity and gain clarity around what are their career goals? How far are they from the licensing exam? What concerns do they have about things that will be included on the licensing exam so that we can incorporate those in the clinical supervision time. And then I also wanted to gain their understanding from other experiences if they did work in other agencies collecting hours, what would they like their structure to be like if we were doing like a supervision refresh? And of course, we talked about ethics related to HIPAA laws and just basic things that I just noticed that we would just need to clean up very swiftly. So, like I said, me and that other supervisor worked at the other agency. So she knew that my paperwork expectations were high. And I knew coming in that I would expect some type of resistance. I believe working with adults, you're going to receive resistance anytime there is change. You will receive that when you work with kids. So it is no different than you work with adults. To me, it's actually harder because adults, as we age and we mature, get stuck in our ways. Okay. I also knew that there may be some resistance and or some pushback with the structure in which I was incorporating in terms of what supervision will start to look like and what I will not do in supervision, because this is a time where it's not my time to sign progress notes. You either need to get here early or you need to stay after. I'm not signing those progress notes when my time should be attended to you to make you a better, well-rounded, ethical clinician. So instead, to give you some numbers, 90% of the group actually had a sigh of relief when I had explained to them my process of how I've done supervision that has worked well at the end goal of clinicians graduating, moving on to another practicum site and or getting licensed. And they were for the most part, very grateful. I was surprised. So that told me a lot for the structure in which I presented literally handouts on the first day of supervision, learning opportunities that they would have to understand case conceptualization and actual supervision. Go figure. No one talked badly about prior supervisors. I don't even like allow that. I didn't even allow it as a college professor. If students start talking about like other professors that are still there, listen, do that on your own time during your break. You know what I'm saying? Like in the hallway. I don't even know who these people are. And even if I do, I don't want to hear it, you know? And if you don't like the way that people are doing things, that's what an evaluation form is for. So if you choose not to take the evaluation seriously, that's on you. So at the end of the day, they were very much ready to grow. Okay. So, what I want to share with you right now is part of my reflection, but also what will be coming up in the other part of the series, which is, some juicy parts. So, I'm going to share with you exactly what I did within those clinical supervision hours to prepare students for the licensing exam, strengthen their job interview confidence, deepen their clinical understanding of how the intake leads to the diagnoses, that leads to the treatment plan, that leads to the treatment, that leads to the progress notes. That's called the clinical loop. Okay. But that is something that most of us are taught, but we don't have a name for it. I only have a name for it because that's what was drilled in my head when I had my 9 to 5 job through the government agency. Okay. But we'll also talk about how when I introduced my certain way of supervision, how it improved not just the clinician, but also the client outcomes. Because you want to have a full circle of, greatness that hits the community that you serve and the clinicians. Now, some reflective questions that I want you to think about as of right now, and by all means, whether you are watching this live, listening to it on the podcast, and or watching a replay on YouTube, is I want you to head down to the comments and I want you to tell me, what kind of supervisor are you or are you becoming? So here are the two options. Are you someone who goes with the flow and whatever the agency says or whatever you learned from your previous supervisors, you kind of just mimic that and develop it as you go? And if that's what you do right now, own it and say, I'm number one, right? The second option is, are you a clinical supervisor in which you develop your clinical supervision tools based off your clinical core values? Like my clinical core values are ethics, quality assurance, and making sure that I'm helping them grow. I'm advocating for structure and I'm advocating for them to pay it forward to their clients to provide epic service. Okay. Like full top tier treatment. Okay. I will say that I have always been that way, but I have evolved to be better over time, meaning that's not how I started. Okay. So I want you to drop your answers. Are you more part one? You kind of going with the flow right now, and maybe you need a structure, which is why you want to get the guide. And or are you someone who leads with clinical values? You want to provide structure, also get the guide, because that guide is going to break down one, what is the difference between contractual clinical supervision and group practice supervision? Because a lot of therapists are teeter-tottering, acting like they don't have a group practice, but they're giving these clinicians clients. That is an agency. That's not just contractual supervision where it's an exchange or a bartering process of either just hours, volunteer, or you're getting paid. Okay. So you do want to know the difference, but I also walk you through what are some things that you want to look for in a great supervisee and what that's supposed to look like. So drop down. Are you person one, go with the flow, or are you person two, you lead with clinical values and structure? Now, second thing I want you to do is drop your questions and or aha moments related to either your clinical supervision experience as a student and what you wish you would have received during supervision that probably makes you a better supervision now, honestly. And then I also want you to drop any questions that you have around being a clinical supervisor. What I would love to do is weave in your questions into future shows in this series and interweave it into some of the things that I've been exposed to, particular to this agency, for example, through some case examples. Okay. So I really hope that you loved this series, part one on let's talk about hot take, bare minimum clinical supervision. Again, grab the guide in the description box, and or if you're on Instagram, checking me out over there at Dr. TK Psych, you can check out my therapist mentorship store and downloads and a cool, amount of tools for you in the link of the bio. But subscribe to the YouTube channel, like this video, I would love to have you back in our business clinical supervision hour. And that wraps up today's episode. Bye.